Hi, and welcome to another episode of Celebrating Small Family Businesses. Today we are celebrating, not separating, celebrating John and Jenn Chan from Vancouver, British Columbia. Hi, John. Hi, Jenn.
Hello,
Hello
hello.
there.
So, we connected through a wonderful service called Podmatch. I'd love to give them a little shout out. I'm glad we
That's
got
right.
connected. So, tell me a little bit about your business and your origin story. How did it get started?
Sure. So I'll take this one. I think we've been working on this company. So we run a marketing agency called 2X, and we've been running it since 2016 or so, starting off as a conversion rate optimization agency. So if you're not familiar with conversion rate optimization agency, we're basically a design consultants where we'll do redesigns and then we'll measure for improvements. And that started in 2016. But this is actually our second company. The first time we started working together was a software company back in 2013. So almost, 10, 11 years ago at this point, where we wrote and sold software. And so we had a productivity app that I was practicing and learning how to code on the side. And she joined in to help support me with that project, and it became a company. And yeah, we've been running the agency since, and that's kind of like our background.
All right. And did you guys, was that your first meeting when Jen joined you to build the software?
No, actually, we met at a conference in 2011, right? So it's like, what is
2011,
it? I
yeah.
always get it's 2010, 2011, because it's like right at the cusp of like December of 2011. Yeah, we met at a conference and we were pretty much both the youngest people there and just clicked and, in ways that we just kind of connected. And then it just kind of became that afterwards. We didn't start working together until 2013. So it was a couple of years. I was still on my last year in university. So that was that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So conversion rate optimization, you can explain that, right?
Sure.
I
We
mean, I'm
started
hearing
as optimization agency. We're currently a advertising agency, so we run ads for e-commerce and SaaS businesses, software businesses, mostly on the e-commerce side because we also have bought e-commerce stores ourselves or e-commerce businesses ourselves. We have two brands under our own name, and run it for that as well. So a little bit on the venture side, a little bit on the agency side for client servicing. But John can probably tell you more about what is the end goal of the whole entire business. He's probably going to be more adequate to actually give you the whole spiel.
okay. Okay. Well, what I'm hearing is that you're, wow,
That you
leveraging, so
don't
lever.
sleep a lot.
No, fortunately, you see these eye bags are like right out there.
See, I knew that.
She picked it right away.
That's her. So you conversion rate optimization is kind of like fine tuning the ad. So you've got that experience on the back end, and then you come into now you're running ads, and you're also eating your own cooking by running your own brands and testing and refining on your own. Like spending your own money to back up what you're doing for other people. That's awesome.
That's right.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head.
Awesome. I hit the nail on the head. You hear that?
So yeah, there you go. Impressive.
So one of the questions we like to ask is, what's a unique proposition, or what's kind of set you guys apart in your industry? I might have just said it, but I want to hear you say it.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the career history, so I'll start there and I'll kind of explain the work that we do, what's unique about the way we do things. In my case, I had basically three major arcs in my career. I started off as a user experience designer, so I came from a design background. I dropped out of school, but I learned how to code in high school, and then that became sort of like the backbone for the foundational skill sets around, if I make a web page, who are the people behind the web page that I'm servicing, and I built some skills that. I did that at a university for about 4.5 years, working at university, not studying there. So I did it for a while, and that sort of led into the conversion optimization agency. But part of the reason why we started a software company was because in 2012 or so, I joined, in our industry, a well-known software company called Basecamp, or 37 Signals. They rebranded. And so what they do is they sell project management software, and they invented a programming language. And so through working with them, I got to see how they ran a remote company firsthand because they wrote and published a lot of work around that, and they wrote and sold their own software. And so, be able to see those type of things, I learned a lot from them, but I also kind of rubbed off on me. And so when I came back here, they're based in Chicago. When I came back to Vancouver and rolling the software company, it kind of got us like through a period where we learned a lot more about technical skills of the development side of products. But towards the end of that company, we started realizing and thinking to ourselves, at least incorrectly so initially, where we thought we weren't good at marketing because we were able to sell a product that people genuinely loved. We're good at design, we're able to write software, but we couldn't figure out the distribution of said software. And so, throughout the years, we've always believed in teaching what we needed to learn. And so initially, we dipped into consulting by leveraging the skill sets that we already had. But over the course of the years, we realized that media buying and running advertising campaigns was a more effective way of approaching it. And as you get into the question of what makes us unique, very few people have that kind of history of being a designer and then getting into a technical sort of skill set and then layering that on top of marketing. And so our consumers that we serve when we run ads, they go through the entire gamut. When you see an ad, you click on the link, there's an experience of what happens when you get to the website on the landing page, all the way through to checkout. And we can think about that entire life cycle of the journey
Wow.
and layer how does the advertising campaign bleed into the messaging on the website to the checkout experience and how they consume the product in order for them to come back. And I would say that most shops, understandably so, are supposed to be specializing in each of those segments in those areas, but very few would be able to tie it all together and also have the ability to have analytics measure from point A to point B from start to finish, with the recognition that sometimes data can be wrong. There's a lot of nuance behind the technical side of it, where if you're not a developer, it's hard to do that type of work as a marketer.
Dang.
That's a lot. I understand. Yeah, I could quickly show my ignorance. Yeah, like attribution of sales, of where it came. There's different ways of attribution from first click and last click and in between and all that stuff, and yeah, tracking all that is a somewhat inexact science because of the different platforms and because of people are people, right?
You hit the nail on the head again, because it's a very hard problem because there are technical barriers to it and there's also platform barriers to it. So for example, if you're on advertising on Meta, it used to be that it was very easy for Meta to track what happens on the consumer side all the way to purchase. But with Apple coming with better consumer privacy protection settings, what does that actually mean for the advertiser? And so when you're reading numbers in your advertising campaign and determining how do you set budgets, or to diagnose if a particular ad creative or ad campaign is it on the ad creative side of things or is it on the landing page side of things, and then the measurement is not fully accurate, how do you know which one to look at versus which ones do you ignore, right? And so if you layer that on top of the statistics behind it and say this one is statistically significant, this one is not, this way you can run an experiment to get to the point of be able to interpret it, this one you cannot. Those are all tools that are available to us, because we come from that kind of background to think about things technically and also being versed in analytics and math.
Okay, yeah, and I think probably the average small marketing firm is more focused on how much budget we'll get you, we'll run the ads for this long and we'll spend your budget and good luck.
Right. It's like
Right.
we'll get our ROI. We know we spend this money and we can get this return back. But how does it exactly play out? And again, it's always the devil's always in the details, right? And how do you prioritize certain budgets versus others, for prioritizing your marketing efforts towards one efforts for the other? You'll that's the kind of thing that we've developed over the years that we now recognize that is a very unique strength to us, especially if we're tasked to audit another brand or another agency's ad
Mhm.
accounts. We usually find a lot of issues where it's like, yeah, they're not supposed to know that, and neither are you, and therefore we can do something about it.
The other
I
thing is
see.
like I can add is probably John, you can probably speak a lot more into is what kind of going back to what you were saying, I was like what kind of distinguish between us versus others in the industry, of when we actually go and look at a client or potential client or even our clients right now, we do often talk about having profitable and scalable ads. And what does that really mean? John probably have a better way to explain that than I do. So maybe you can actually talk about
Sure. I mean, it's one of those things where it's table stakes for any marketing campaign. You have to make sure it's profitable. And I think I see, not always, I see sometimes people approach marketing from the perspective of just wearing your marketing hat, whereas realistically, you should be wearing a finance hat, right? And so marketing and finance, they both work hand in hand from a finance planning side of things, but also being able to read a P&L. So if you know that, the unit economics of an ad campaign is to be profitable, what does that look like in terms of the profile of the business, in terms of your EBIT and your net margins? Is the company profitable? And if you can think about strategic options for, do you fundraise or not? Are you looking to sell the business or not? There are different levers that are available to you from a marketing perspective that I talk a little bit less about, because I think I understand that most people intuitively understand that. But to Jen's point, it's not just dollar in, dollar out and making sure it's profitable. We should always track it down to the unit economics and see what the overall strategy of the company is.
And I think that's the biggest piece of what just separates us as a business to others that is in the industry that is doing similar services to us, and why clients choose us over the others, just because we do ask of those tough questions and like, hey, not just looking at your ad creative, not just looking at your ad account, how much are you trying to spend, how much are you trying to let go, what is the end goal of the company at the like next 6 months, next 12 months, what is the margins and net things that you're trying to actually reach. We look at all those things to think about how should we go about putting a plan together for the next 6 to 12 months of working together.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you are heads and tails over above everything else that we've talked to in other companies. Yeah. Wow.
Thank you.
Good job.
Shifting slightly to, I'm geeking out here, but
exactly. We need to get
we're
on.
talking about family. So, what do you love most about working with family?
I have lots to say, but why don't you start?
I think it's a tough one because then like I didn't really start loving it in the first place. I actually didn't want to work with him. I worked with him initially just because of, okay, I know he was struggling with something. I know I'm good at that to actually be able to support that. My personality is very much of a very supportive role throughout my entire life anyway. So I support anywhere and anyone that is around me. So when he asked, I was like, yeah, of course I can do that for you. And I'm here for the long run anyway. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be here. And it was supposedly temporary. Then it became serious afterwards. I'm like, okay, well, since I'm here already, let's just go with it. So it's just going through this roller coaster. And I just went on this board of train thinking I was going to get off the next stop. But no, it just kept going. What I kind of loved about working with him over years, I think we started working together when we were in like 20s, right? So mid 20s. Through the next like 10 years of working together, we grew together as individuals and as partners and as lovers and as like now we're married, right? So there's a lot of growing up that we were doing together. And I think it's quite interesting, and I don't think a lot of couples that have worked together and is in business together have gone through that as well. So that's like part of the individuality of our story, of how we grow up together and now going into business throughout that 10 years. Lots and lots of things have changed. Personality have changed. Our mindset have changed. Our habits and like things that we do have changed. Our perspectives have changed over time as well. Mm-hmm. And learning from this, I think learning from him, he's taught me a lot throughout that 10 years.
I mean, I learned a lot from her too, so it's not always
smart boy.
It's a two-way. It's definitely a two-way street.
That's for me.
Oh my goodness.
No, I'd actually love to expand on that, because I think I also want to hear from Jenn first, because for me, I've always thought about this, and it's come up in past podcast interviews as well. But I think for me, what I loved about working with her, it's not for the faint of heart, as you must hear from now from all the different families that you've interviewed, working with families can be very complex, and the power dynamics when you're dealing with finances, you can see a lot of issues with conflicts. But I think one of the guiding principles in the way that we've worked together, and we've always looked at, is it a good idea to start a business with your girlfriend and mix finances? The litmus test has always been around not how well when things are working well. Of course, there's going to be trials and tribulations in any business, but it's how well did we fight? And so when I think about, when things are going bad or when things aren't going really as well, she's always been my rock. And to have someone to have that level of empathy and understanding of like, oh, we just got screwed over in a business deal, or we just had this really bad interaction with a certain thing. She felt firsthand was like, oh, I know exactly what that means. And to see me being in a depressive state and for her to just roll up her sleeves and get back to work, like it's hard to express the kind of loyalty and strength that you have in one another that you cannot find in anywhere else, because in most cases it's supposed to be transactional. You're business partners. You have your personal life and then you have your business life separated. But the downside is also the fact that it's mixed to, in her case, when she needs personal boundaries outside of business, right? Those are kind of things that I'm sure you hear a lot about where those things can mix in. There's other downsides. I'll speak a little bit of that as well with power dynamics, for example, right? Whenever you get into, like, let's say performance issues or fights, you can't just easily break up. You can't easily just tell the other person and fire the other person. Those things should always be an option available to you, but navigating those challenges are very, very challenging, right? How much is it my fault? How much is it her fault? It gets really personal really quickly that you can't have with an employee or a regular business partner. And so I think all of those things, built into like us growing up together and learning through a lot of things together, as you look back in the years, every year there's still challenges, but every year it gets better. And you can't but help be optimistic about, we're in our 30s right now, but you can't but help be optimistic about what's to come for us. Yeah. And at least for me, that's how I feel about it. And I joke with her, like, because every time we get into any type of new business or start a new thing, she's always like the one that's bearing a lot of the workload. And I'm always the one that's, dealing with all the fun aspect of starting something new or taking a new thing on. And, but I always joke, it's like, you're coming with me on this one, right? It's because for me, it's like, it's easy for me to bring her on. But then there's, real challenges of should I do it because it's their strengths and weaknesses, and how does that actually play out with what is the advantage of running this particular business as a couple versus keeping it separate.
Wow, you guys are such deep thinkers. I mean, yes, I was getting choked up there. Yeah. So what you were saying about the rock and knowing that she's there. Totally. I totally experienced that. And, in our case, it was my family business that Connie was, Connie we moved onto a family property. We lived next door to my parents out in the country. And then, I worked at the business, all the time. And then Connie would come to work at the office some. And I just thank God she was there, because again, you guys don't have the two-generation dynamics, I don't think, from what I'm hearing. I was the son that waiting for permission to grow up, as I call it, and there were several times when Connie was she had the objectivity to say, whoa, this doesn't make sense, and she would go to bat for her position, her belief there that this was right for the company and the family, even as an in-law that didn't have that blood stake. And it was
even as his dad was standing there blustering, but we've got to do something, and it's kind of like, oh no, we don't.
So yeah, I mean,
need to stop.
Now I'm talking about our story, but yes, I can completely relate. And the what you said about the different dynamics. Yeah, sometimes that's what's what I think it's what scares some people about family businesses. Like if they're going, either going to start one or maybe go to work for another family's business, that how are those dynamics going to play out, and how is it going to impact them? Because ultimately, for the family business owners, it comes down to we have to prioritize something, and usually the family is going to last longer than the business. I mean, in worst case scenario and best case scenario, right? And so there's times when you just have to prioritize the family, and if there's a performance shortfall or something, a weakness in somewhere that you don't just replace that person like they would in corporate, right? You make do, you figure it out.
You communicate.
You share. You rebalance the load, even if it's a little unbalanced. That's worth it for the rest of everything.
Absolutely, and I think this is why I would say that family businesses is not for the faint of heart, because in a very broad generalization, it's bad advice to start a company with family members or lovers, because again, it's because generally speaking, most people aren't going to be prepared or able to manage or deal with the conflicts that come up, because they're so complicated, right? And they're so intricate, and there's the aspect of betrayal and loyalty and whatever that's all mixed in. They're the basis of great dramas for a reason. You know what I mean? But the thing is, at the same time though, but when it works, oh my God, it really is beautiful. And when it works, it's we get to go and travel and vacations together, and we bring our work together, and we're having long walks at the park, and we're talking about business, and we're at the sauna, and we're I'm talking about this new thing. It's because it's so integrated, right? When it works, it's beautiful, but it's one of those things where you have to be a long-term thinker right from day one. There's no second option, right? And so if you're committed, for better and for worse, right? Because for us, it's we got into it almost by accident. It wasn't a very thought through answer, right? Which is, I'm refraining from joking about how she moved into it, because we never had the talk about moving in together. I just woke up one day and she just had more clothes at our place, and I'm just wait a second. I think she infiltrated the house, you know what I mean? And so sometimes I even joke around, even being married, where it's this is the best sleepover ever, right? It's you just haven't left. But in business, it's always been like that too. And again, you can't recommend that to someone, because that's not a good idea.
Well, you couldn't plan that.
No.
That because it happened organically, that, I think that's what makes it work. Is that you
Absolutely.
learned it, by inches, rather than, okay, we're going to make a plan and tomorrow we're going to do this thing. It was a gradual, so you just felt your way into it, and your communication evolved along with it. And I think that's such a big key. There's a communication. We're not trained, right? We're not trained for those challenges.
Because you can't be. There's nothing in school or in regular life that can prepare you for those kind of dynamics. But here's the fun part that, I think right now I'm coming to terms with, that I'm realizing that we're actually a lot less alone than we realize. Because every now and then, this is 10 years of us working together. We're starting to meet more and more other couples, especially people that have been around this longer than we have. And next thing you know, we're talking about, we're having this fight over this really silly thing. And then they're you young kids. Let me tell you about the time I fired my wife from her job, and it's just man, it's we realize that a lot of those dynamics that is on one hand very unique to us, but just on a broad level, just like entrepreneurship, forget about working in a family business, you start realizing that as lonely as it was, you're actually not alone. There's other people that have been through very similar or even worse situations that you have. And I find solace in that. And that's why, as part of this preamble to this interview, I got so excited, because it's whenever I see that kind of dynamics, I know you two have a lot of really wonderful stories that we just don't even have a chance to hear, because you guys have been in this game longer than we have, and you know exactly where we're coming from. And that's why it's to your point, you choked up, because it's you felt that, because we went through that for the first time, and it won't be our last, right?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, what I was trying to remember before, you talked about fighting fair, and that's actually a phrase I want to build a product around at some point. So we do consulting, a blend of consulting and coaching for family businesses, because that's where we come from. And we're not trained, but knowing how to have a constructive disagreement, that's a skill. It's a skill set, and it's something you have to practice. But it's based on some understandings, I know if we disagree, she's not going to pack her bag and leave.
Yeah.
Thought about it once or twice, but I didn't.
But there was earlier in my career, this was something we had to learn. I had to learn that it was okay that it was going to be safe to argue, and it wasn't going to be.
Well, and he's an only child too, so he doesn't understand the joy of going up and smacking your brother just to hear him cry. Okay, that was more fun. But he didn't understand
Things you
that.
can do in a family business that you can't do in a regular employment. I can't just like walk up and smack my employee in the head.
You know,
Right.
sexual harassment is a thing.
Yeah, right.
But it just, you know, for him to have to learn how to play a game with somebody else and not like his parents who would either let him win or beat the crap out of him. You know, he had to figure out that with me he was safe. He could get in my face and go, and I'd go, yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Or
kind
I'd
of a metaphor.
back, and we're fine.
Yeah,
It's kind of metaphor for other things too, you know. But it's the other thing that you said about the isolation. I really want to touch on that because I think that's, you know, part of why we're doing this is for outreach to other family businesses to listen to family and hear what you just said, which is that. You know, the number one rule in my family business for my father was don't talk about the business to anybody outside the family. You don't talk about it. It's our business. It was because it's family. So there's a more personal sense to it, and so it is isolating. And I think to some degree we all feel like our problems are unique. You know, they're bigger than, you know, other people don't feel it the same as or whatever. But
nobody else has done it just like we have.
But in the family business, yeah, I think just like you said, they are unique to us in that they're us, but at the same time, there's common themes that are so common that we just don't hear about because people are a little leery about talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Now, his dad had no problems going and sitting at a bar someplace and telling his accountant and his lawyer all this stuff. But, you know, it was different where he didn't find a mentor or a coach that could, you know, work his way through this. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to save people from all the crap that we went through and making all the mistakes we did, and we made them all.
Right. And I think that's hugely important because I realize that for us, I think we're lucky. And in that sense that I think, you know, even when we were young, we had a few guiding like guardrails in terms of like values and principles that I think like, saved us from
Smart.
you know, disaster in a lot of different scenarios. But, you know, one of which I talked about, and again, these things were because I think we're lucky that we just happened to have that. And so for all the trials and tribulations and some of the lessons, if we didn't have those, it could be disastrous.
Right.
And we a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted effort, a lot of wasted, you know, money really just to get ourselves going. And so to have that dedication towards serving that particular area of practice, I think it's really important. I'm glad you guys are doing that and even doing this podcast, because even some of the topics that we're talking about today, it's hard to share that in a regular, you know, different episode or different podcast environment because they wouldn't have known to ask, or they wouldn't have known to pick up on that. Oh, that right there, that's really important. I can let's expand on that. And I think, you know, to my point earlier around, you know, why I love these type of impromptu conversations around these type of things, because it's like when you ask me that, it's like, oh man, like it just comes up and but you're right, it doesn't get told. It's hard for those things to be told, because in most regular conversations, having a conversation with an accountant or a lawyer, it's not going to come up, right? It's like you can talk about like, oh, I'm having issues with this, but it's just there's certain dynamics and nuances. It's just really hard to capture.
Yeah, they haven't had that experience, and they're going to kind of back off. They don't really want to talk about it. They want to be your friend, but they don't want to. They're not qualified to really give advice. Have you got a therapist?
It's more of like the professional setting of like, okay, well, it's your accountant, it's your lawyer. Say it's all about the business. Like, what's the business problems? How can I help you solve it?
Right.
I think John came about a podcast with Sampar and Andrew Wilkinson, and they talked about this phenomenon about having people around you that you can be vulnerable with, and then the more successful you are, the more that you need to be very selective to your circle and who you can actually share those type of information with. How you said it was like, hey, if we're a family business, we don't talk about our family business outside of family or whatever it is, or share it with other people. I think there's a bit of a like, what I kind of liked about how they shared it was there is always going to be that 5 people around you that you can be very vulnerable with, because they will not judge you. They will not actually be like they will not, what's that word?
Judgmental.
Yeah,
or
they'll
just,
be gentle.
you know...
Yeah, they won't actually be malicious with you or anything like that. They are actually there for you. So you can actually share anything with them for that particular purpose. And then anything outside of that is like, oh, just acquaintances that's like, okay, it's like might be business acquaintances or like anything that is like could be friends. You could actually share some information, not all the information. Then you have the outside circle, like, hey, absolutely nothing about that. That they would not hear inside stories about your what is going on in your business, how your business is doing, how much are you making, how you're charging, blah blah blah. Those are all the other things that is. I think that's actually quite helpful in terms of how we go about thinking of our next step for ourselves as well as we grow our business, as we become more successful, as we grow our wealth and our riches, and as our business grow bigger and bigger, because there is a way that we need to actually cipher and filter through the people that we are around with a lot. And kind of like poker, you gotta like read the people around you. It's like, hey, what are they here for, or what are they not here for?
Exactly.
So,
And reevaluate on a regular basis. Do I still need this person in my life? Because, you know, especially at our age, we've cycled through a lot. And
sure.
And then we have a hardcore group that
You
no
know,
matter what.
there's an interesting dynamic about being in a family business that I want to touch on, because I
Right.
think when we talk about being in business and having a circle of friends that are close to you that you can share anything with is hugely valuable. But one of the things that comes up with family business specifically, especially if you have scenarios where you're sharing with your friends, like for example, I can talk about my business with my friends, but if I'm having partner issues or the person that I'm combating with is my wife, it becomes an ethics issue, because after you talk to a friend or you talk to somebody else, they still know and they have to interact with them. And so that dynamic is something that comes up in family, because like it's not about gossiping, it's about working through problems. And in the absence of that, if you want a third party sort of person that can sort of that's what I can see, for example, being a coach or even a therapist helpful with, is because you have that arm's length sort of like way to solve that particular problem. But it comes up with family where or friends when you can't share that or talk about it in a way without the other person being impartial, because they still have to interact with the family member afterwards. When you're family friends, they're still interacting with them. And so it just adds to that layer of and again, going back to being lucky, it adds to a layer of complexity about running a family business. But being lucky aspect of it is that I think we've had multiple instances where we've had friends not take sides, that they know that there's a second half to the story. When they hear the other person complain and have that dumped on them, they know that their job as a friend is to like, yeah, John was being mean to you and he shouldn't have said those things. He said that in anger and all those type of things. That must be really hard. Have that all come out and then come talk to me afterwards, completely normal, and be like, hey, what's going on in your world and what's happening? That, and then it's like, how do you have friends like that? And when you have someone like that, again, it just, touches our heart. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it was tricky and hard to navigate, especially early on when I wasn't comfortable of her going to our friends, or if I didn't do that on the other side, how do we navigate doing that in an ethical manner? Like that's a very family business specific sort of like trait that it's hard to talk about or come across and know what the right or wrong answer is.
That,
Yeah.
yeah, we've had some of that because I don't have a lot of filters. Who knew? And he might have a few more than I do. So, he might. So we've had to negotiate that because I've had to either apologize or say, it is who I am. Suck it up.
Yep. But again, it's one of those things that just adds a layer of complexity as you navigate that kind of relationship. It's not just the two of you or the three of you or the family, like the family unit. It's the extended circles around it and having them, like, how do you integrate them or not integrate them into part of your life? It just adds another layer of complexity.
Right. Yeah, and we are all born into family businesses. If you think about it, all of your views on money and relationships came from your parents and how they view it. Well, then how did they view it out, their parents? And then, so it's generational. So that's another thing that, being aware of that, is this mine? Is it so relevant at this point? And if it's not, then update, move it out and bring in something new. And that's been another hard thing to get past sometimes.
For sure.
Yeah, we met. We had a mentor back in the day that was a leadership development program, and he it was trying to up level people's thinking. And so his thing was, if you've got a roof over your head and you're eating regularly, you're running a successful business. Okay, you've got cash flow in and cash flow out, and you're managing resources, you're running up your business. And if you think of it like that, you're not as small or ignorant or whatever as you think. It's everything else is just a matter of scale after that. And wow, what a he was a wise man. So that's part of what that is about. And
so why don't we go on to this one?
Well, I think we've. Is there anything that you know now that you wish you'd known when you started about being in business together?
I do, but I'm not going to start. Jen, you go first. If you need time, I can go first, but I just don't want to hijack the mic.
Yes, I wish. I think I wish. Can I say?
Of course, you can say anything you want,
and we can always edit if we can always edit it out if you're not happy.
No. You can say anything you want. It's fine.
I think I wish I've known that he have ADHD before we start a business together. But then he wouldn't have known himself as well because he got diagnosed quite late. So I think that was probably the biggest barrier and challenge to how we work together and how we need to adapt to working together, because I'm very much of a doer and like executioner and like just get out of my way and like, okay, well, tell me what I need to do. What is the end goal you need to actually get to? And like, I'll get it all done for you. Traits of ADHD kind of in that way makes it a little bit more complicated when I have to work with him. He overthinks a lot. He takes a long time to actually go and execute things. He might actually procrastinate a lot. There's just like a lot of things that just is a barrier to getting him to the end destination of what he needs to do. Great thing about it is that he is a starter of any type of great ideas. He's a good thinker. He's a good ideation person. He knows how to go with dealing with chaos at a very split of a second of like trying to problem solve a lot of things. Very creative. That's great. That's the great thing about him and his situation. But it takes a lot of time and effort for us to kind of find that mold of like, okay, that piece of puzzle together to kind of like, how do we actually work with that? And how do we come together with our strengths and weaknesses? And like, okay, if your weakness is ADHD, how can I actually fit my pieces so then I can fit perfectly with your ADHD in that way? That's a lot of adoption that needed to be happening throughout the last 10 years, or like not even last like 5-6 years of like diagnosing him, and then now have to go like, okay, now I know you had this scenario or this situation, now I have to go and deal with it. How do I deal with it? I have to also talk to him and communicate with him very differently from how I've communicated with him before, because it wasn't working. I was like, why don't you get it? And it's just like, now I know a lot more about ADHD and I know a lot more about what he's going through. I can slowly become more empathetic of how he's going through things. And then I was like, okay, what are you trying to really do? Help me go through your thought process, go through that for me, and then let me simplify it for you. Is probably the biggest thing I would say. I wished I knew much sooner than it is after.
Okay. In programming lingo, I think what I'm hearing is that you're more of a sequential program, and he's multi-threaded.
Absolutely. I was gonna say, if you're familiar with, I think they teach it in the US, where it's we're the classic visionary versus integrator, right? So it's like I'm the person that's thinking and looking ahead, and she's the one that has to deal with a lot of the thing gets thrown back to her. And I think she's being delicate about it, but I think to her point in where she was emotionally coming from, you can sort of hear the the stress and agony of like having to deal with me, because I actually realized that halfway through it, and in being self-aware about, oh, those things aren't natural and it is chaotic and problematic for someone who has to deal with all of the mess that I created, in a sense, right? But to her point about being great with problem solving, for example, like coming into this interview without necessarily to read all the questions in advance and thriving on that kind of thing, it just meant that we really did have to rely on our strengths and weaknesses, like every family or any business partner. That was us as our own maturity as we grew and learn about one another. It's one of those things. And I thought we should talk about something else, but I thought that's a great example, because it's true as you think about any type of trait that we have with each other. How do you integrate with one another, and how do you make sure that whatever personal tics or aspect of it doesn't cause a lot of stress from the other side? I think for me, one of the things that I kind of wish I learned earlier on relates to that, but it's around being respectful about our differences. I think when we first started working early on, I talk fast, I think fast, I do a lot of different things. I also had a few years ahead of her in my career, because I was like, the writing was on the wall, right? I dropped out of school. I had 3 different career shifts within a course of 12 years, right? It's like, gee,
Read the room.
One ADHD, right? It's like just no hints at all along the way, right? It's not like I was dropping it at her just to pick up something. But the broader point was like, because I had that dynamic going into the initial working relationship, it meant that, the first company I was building, incorrectly so, I kept being the smartest person in the room. And I say that with quotes because I wasn't, right? And even if I was technically smart, there's a lot of aspects about business that you cannot lead with that. And I know that now, right? And it was through a painful process of, a lot of late nights and a lot of fights. But over the course of the years, as we learn about my traits and learn about our strengths and weaknesses, I learned to be respectful about the skill sets that she brought to the table that weren't directly based on technical skills of being a coder or being a designer or those type of things, because she didn't have that background, nor is she supposed to. And where that plays out really well, especially in the current business that we have today, is our different perspectives in think about we're advertising to a wide breadth of people. Right? If I talk too fast and that rubs people the wrong way or sends it, that's a certain preference, she balances out really well. If I have a certain trait about thinking about things in a certain way, she provides a counterpoint to that very well. When we're selling products, if I'm not the end consumer because, I'm a male demographic focusing on these type of products and I understand messaging from these type of messages, she will look at things from a very subtle level and be like, hey, notice that? That's really important. And that will completely overlook. And so being respectful of the other person's strengths and weaknesses and helping them encourage and flourishing that, I think that's hugely valuable. And it's one of the things that we haven't gotten into, like multi-generational, running a business as a family in that sense. But it makes me think a lot about, whether if our kids work in this business or not, hopefully not, maybe they're doing their own things to explore, but helping them encourage and flourish in their own way that are unique to them, I think is something that I wish more people recognize and hear about. That we took many years of very painful conversations and late nights to get past, which I'm glad we got past now. But it's one of those things where it was very easy to overlook.
Mm-hmm.
Bravo. I mean,
exactly. I couldn't say it any better.
Wow. Yeah, we can relate.
Yeah, because I'm dyslexic. So I look at the world entirely different than he does. And he's a perfectionist. They don't necessarily go together.
Yes.
That's when it works.
Well, and even to go to the labels of strengths and weaknesses, you have to tread lightly, because what can seem like a weakness can actually be a strength. It's kind of situational, like you said. In a chaotic situation, she's likely to be able to figure a way through much faster than I am. I know for spatial relationships, that's a different kind of chaos. But like when we were younger and we were going to pack a car full of stuff to go on a trip, I'd look at the pile of stuff and I'd look at the car and I'd say, you're going to have to take some stuff back. It's not going. And she'd look at it and say, oh yeah, it'll fit. And she was always right. Always right. And those kind of things, I just had to learn to appreciate and not fight.
He still fights, but I think
Once in a while, come around.
There was a book
Yeah, but
years ago, Mars, Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus, and that
yes.
really helped me level up on that scale. It was an early day, but it helped. Appreciating the
No,
differences.
no, for sure. And I think for us, it's again hard in a family setting because even if you recognize the strengths and weaknesses of a regular business partner, it gets personal. And so
Yeah.
when you see the other person's weaknesses, to not fault them, take them to a fault, and to associate that with things outside of your life, it's that's another can of worms too. But it's because it's one of those things where, again, um, having strengths and weaknesses is an important trait of any leadership or any position in business. But in a family setting, is to not appreciating the person's strength and not taking their role or fighting over it or that kind of thing is one aspect of it that would come up. But the other aspect of it is on the weakness side that you don't um, take it on that person personally.
Right.
It's there's an element of that it's very easy because, like you said, when you're done at work, next thing you know, you're going on a road trip and you have to pack the car, and to carry that emotion or that mental understanding of the other person and separating that within that environment and then going back to work the next day afterwards, it's like tough.
It is. It is tough. I love what you said at the beginning. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's not. It's not. But there's that. I come from an investing side, so there's risk and reward.
Yes.
The more reward, there's more risk. It's going to happen.
Absolutely. But when it works.
And when it works, it's amazing.
Yes.
Wow. Do you guys? You don't have any other employees, do you? Is it just the two of you, or do you have a team?
We have employees. We have a team. They're based all over the world right now. It didn't used to be that way. We used to have more employees co-located in Vancouver, but the pandemic sort of like shifted that, and so we're mix of part-time staff and one full-time staff and a bunch of contractors. It's easier in the agency world to fluctuate based on demand and your sales velocity to manage fulfillment in a contract and setting. And so we've got the infrastructure now that we didn't have before. And so in terms of roles now, we're still both handling account management and fulfillment. So we're still involved with the day-to-day operations of the business. And I lean more on the sales side and she leans more on the marketing side of the business. And when we first talked about, the operations of the business that we bought and owned, and so like 80% of the time is still most on the agency. The 20% time is on the venture. And we have a general manager effectively that takes care of operations of those businesses that we meet on a regular basis to make sure that things are still running smoothly. So that's our current setup right now.
Nice.
Cool.
Is there anything in particular that you've learned from one of your employees that's been of
Lots.
great value?
I mean, so I think I'll talk about the hiring process. And I think that might be true for any general business, not just for family business. I think the thing about hiring and leadership really is that, any great hire should be better at you in their respective roles. And for an agency, it's a little bit harder because when you're selling a service and you're selling labor effectively, you have to be you're basically arbitraging talent. And so what it means is that generally for a marketing agency, you're bringing in more junior and intermediate employees and then finding ways to make sure that they incentivize to stay with you medium to long term. And so in terms of me learning from my employees, I think, for me, it's about knowing how to step away and delegate and be so I talked about earlier, you teach what you need to learn. I think the staff and the team has helped me articulate a lot of the functional processes that we're doing, that we've internalized, that we otherwise would not have been able to. And so seeing them do better in each of the respective roles than what we would have done individually, that's always really rewarding. Any business owner can say that, can understand and appreciate that. And so I think that's maybe I should be more specific. One thing that I learned from them, but I think broadly, in a very general sense, that's been my experience bringing people in and seeing them thrive in our environment, because primarily we've been hiring people that are earlier in their careers, has been really rewarding and very fulfilling for me. And maybe I'll come back to like a more specific lesson or thing that I learned from them. But Jen, you have anything?
I think I want to build upon just the delegation part. I think indirectly you kind of learned how to delegate more. And I think when we started the business, it's just us, just you and I, right? So it was more so that like, okay, we can bring on everything and anything that we can actually do. We always believe that we can actually go through with it and make things happen. As we grow as a company, as we grow as a team, we slowly had to learn how to delegate parts of the business and parts of the task, parts of the projects to other people. And it's really hard. It's a growing, it's like a growing up process too, as a business owner, to now switching to being leadership and being management. In that, like, you need to you need to let go and know how to let go and when to let go of, like, okay, it's okay, you need to put this piece to that person and trust in that person that they can actually go and fulfill whatever they need to do. Now that our team have worked with us for quite a bit of time now, up to year to 3 years now, some team members have now know the dynamics between him and I, and know exactly when to just, like, hey, do not involve John, or like, let John know that no, you cannot do this, let me take care of it. And then teach him how to actually delegate and be okay. It's like, no, I don't need you to do this, I just need you to make a decision. When I give you two options, you choose one, please, kind of thing. I think that helped him a lot in terms of being aware of his leadership role and how he can actually be improving his leadership at that time, for being delegating that way. But it's also to be more self-aware for him of his ADHD, is because he wants to, like, he knows he needs to be a better leader, but he doesn't quite know exactly how to actually let go of certain things, and prioritizing what to let go and what not to let go. I think the team right now have found a really good soft spot to know exactly where to involve him and when not to involve him.
They know when to ask me for things, and they know when to
Exactly.
ask Jen for it, because John's not going to
John's
respond.
not going to respond for like days. So I think that part have helped. And as for me, I've learned really quickly to delegate. And I was like, I can't do everything. I've always been the one that's doing, like, operations and marketing and, like, all the tasks that needs to be done for the agent, for the clients themselves as well, for execution. So now that I have a lot more help, I'm like, okay, I'm really trusting to actually just let them go through it. When they are stuck, I know I need to be a backup for it. But I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to give you all the silver spoon and put everything into the instructions. Like, can you go and figure it out for me? I'm not going to give you the instruction for it. How about you give me a proposal of 1 to 2 different options, and then let me figure out the rest, or evaluate what your options were. That never been that never been something I've done previously either. I also had to go through a lesson to kind of let go, and it's like, trust the team to kind of figure out some things. And the biggest shift is because my mental capacity was, like, just over the top 110% already. I can't stuff more things in there. Like, I really need to actually lower my mental capacity. And that's the biggest mental shift for myself. It's like, nope, I'm not going to try to solve this problem. I'm going to tell them these are the results and these are the things that I'm trying to solve. Can you go and figure it out for me, and then come back with some options? That's the growing part of how we're dealing with the team, and how the team is actually dealing with us at the moment.
So much there.
Well said.
Yeah, so much there. Wow. On one level, I heard so much you said about early in that about delegation would also apply to a founder trying to navigate the early parts of succession, because there's very similar thought processes. They've been doing it, they know how to do it, they know they can do it their certain way, and they have to learn to trust. And part of that trust is knowing that people are going to make mistakes, and you have to be okay with that too. And they got to make their mistakes in order for them to learn, because that's part of them. How they recover from the mistakes is then how you learn to trust them more for the next time. And the other thing you were talking about reminded me of, have you heard of Dale Carnegie? And
Yes.
One of his techniques that he published in his book so many years ago was, when somebody comes to him with a problem, he, if it's not, okay, tell me your problem and I'll fix it for you. It's, no, if you're going to come to me with a problem, here's a form you fill out. What's the problem? What do you think, what are several possible solutions, and what do you think is the best possible solution, and why? And you bring that to me filled out, we'll talk. And you kind of described that process in your, in how you learn to delegate.
But we should systemize it though, because we actually never thought about it that way. That was all like organic
I've
in the way that
actually
we
systemized it.
She
We
did.
read a different book that actually had that.
clearly.
So, but it is very, very similar. And I think it's very important to, as a young company that started as a startup, to grow into a next phase of their company and the next phase of the company. If you are only thinking about, okay, well, we're the best of what we do, and we're holding on everything so tightly and not really sharing the responsibilities and the tasks and everything that the roles, you'll always be just the two of you, and your business will not grow. If you really want it, that's totally fine if you actually want to grow a business just for the two of you and there's a lifestyle business that way. But if you have bigger ambition to actually grow a business and grow it bigger, with more team members and as a bigger company, then you need to think about changing of the roles and how you're going to actually have passed down the baton to somebody else to actually go through. No, I'm not going to deal with finances anymore. Hey, Grace, can you take this on? And you just need to meet with me once a month, every 2 weeks, to actually go through all the P&L and all the things. Therefore, I can actually go back to my CEO to actually talk about those finances. The high level stuff, then now you're shifting your role very differently from where you started 5, 6, 7 years ago to now you're at a different stage of the company. You need to be able to actually shift that mindset as you grow as a team, as you grow as a company. And the team members that you hire on board also need to know that is the end goal. That is the North Star we're trying to get to.
That's important. That transparency too. This is where, sharing that this is our, direction. And someday we may sell and you may be working for somebody else, or whatever. That's huge. I was also thinking that sometimes people grow a business like that and they find themselves in a role where they miss doing the work. They miss those early days, and so they actually sell the company and then go start another one and start over small so they can get their hands dirty again. And that's okay too, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
They do it with a lot more money in their pocket usually, so they can enjoy those early days much more without having to sweat the little stuff.
Retired. Now what do I do? I should go find some work.
There you go.
This has been wonderful.
It has been.
So my last question is always, where can people contact you? I think I need to modify that a little bit into who should contact you, like what type of business, and then where should they find you?
For sure, and I appreciate that plug. So you can find us at 2x.agency. That's the website URL. So https 2x.agency. You'll find our agency site, and you'll learn about our different services, primarily in ad creative production. So if you're creating video ads or what's called UGC ads, where user-generated content ads, we primarily work with e-commerce and software companies, as Jenn alluded to earlier. But in some cases, we might have some B2B software companies that are looking for lead generation efforts. So if you're looking for more customers or more leads, generally they're good to have a discussion with us. They generally need to be a bit further along where they have existing sales and existing customers, so we can have data to look at to know how to improve whatever metrics and systems that they have. But that's the place to find us. Personally, you can connect with us on Twitter and LinkedIn. So, I'm John Chan on LinkedIn. There's a lot of us on there, but if you look for that under 2X, you'll probably find me. And on Twitter, I'm at JTCCHAN. I'm sure these will be links in the show notes that I'll send over to you as well. But I think that's the best way to reach out to me.
For myself, it's LinkedIn as well. Jennifer Lowe. Jennifer. Yeah, I think it's Jennifer Lowe. And then on Twitter, Jenn Lowe _ with 2 N's. So you can probably reach me there.
Awesome. Yeah, we will make sure we clarify that and get it in the show notes.
Yeah. This has been so much fun.
I'm so glad you did this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah.
Well,
I want to go to Vancouver now and have dinner.
come find us. Yes.
Well, next time we're in Tampa, we also can actually come over and have
yes, if you come to
Absolutely.
Tampa, please let us know.
Yeah. We would love to see you anytime.
Thank you for having us.
Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Okay?